ain't the king of the temples too. Don't let them rise and make a fool of you. Let your soul feel whole and refuse to let them in. Let your light shine bright and learn to see again.
This is your place for all things Detroit Red Wings and all things Chicago Blackhawks. This is the Stick Blade Podcast with your hosts, Jordan Linscott, David Barnhouse, Nick LePage, and Tim Stompanato.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Stick Blade Podcast. It is your place for all things Detroit Red Wings and Chicago Blackhawks, as well as news around the NHL. On tonight's show, it's an episode of Oops, All Red Wings, because Tim and Nick are not here to talk about the Hawks with us. But that doesn't matter, because guess what? The Detroit Red Wings had a crazy week this past week. They signed Lucas Raymond, they signed Jonathan Berggren, they signed Moritz Seider, they had their training camp. So the week was kind of busy for the Detroit Red Wings.
Super busy.
Super busy, and there is a lot to talk about on tonight's show for the Wings. Again, I'm your host for tonight, Jordan Linscott. I'm joined by my co-host, David Barnhouse. Everybody, welcome to the show. Dave, this is probably the most hype I've been for the Wings in the past almost decade.
I mean, what's not to be hyped about? Like, it's the first time I feel like this rebuild window is finally coming to a close. We just signed two of our biggest core key pieces, young guys, in Seider and Raymond to their long-term contracts, which we'll talk about in the show. And, you know, this show's going to be a great one. It's the best flavor of cereal you can buy at Meijer. Oops, all Red Wings. Let's get this baby on the road.
All right, so let's jump into the first piece of news. And I can't even believe this is not the main topic for a show, but everything here happened this quick. The first piece of news to talk about, the Detroit Red Wings inked, and we're going to talk about both of them at the same time. The Detroit Red Wings inked Lucas Raymond and Jonathan Berggren to new contracts. Jonathan Berggren inked to a 1 year, I believe it was $800,000 contract.
$850,000.
Okay, so basically a league minimum style contract. Lucas Raymond, on the other hand, signed an 8-year contract with the club. Man, Lucas Raymond, everybody, we kind of knew, what was going to go on with him. We knew that he was probably going to be a core piece of this team for the next, foreseeable decade or so. Detroit has locked Lucas Raymond up for 8 years now at this point, and what is he making? $8 million this year, right?
It's about $8 million AAV.
It's like 8.07 or something, but we'll say $8 million for the sake of the show. Easy numbers for people.
I have it right here, 8.075.
Yeah, so $8.07 million for 8 years of Lucas Raymond. And admittedly, as much as people want to say, oh, he had 1 year where he really popped off, and yes, it's true. He's continued to take steps forward every year for the Detroit Red Wings since he's came into the NHL. He has looked every part the first line winger. And at the end of the season, he was straight up pushing the Red Wings towards that playoff spot.
He put the team on his back and refused to let us miss the playoffs. Yes, we did miss the playoffs, but not because of, him. We lost on loser points to the Caps, but they got swept. But no, he made it known in the end of season, exit interviews, panels, I love the city. I want to be in this city. So I wasn't worried about signing him. I was just getting kind of anxious about, gosh, it's taking way longer than it should. So I know they were working out all the details and how they wanted it to be. But seeing Razor sign, especially after the performance he put on last year, and I think getting a full year, learning under Patrick Kane and continuing to work with Larkin, I think he's going to have an even better year this year.
That's the crazy thing about this. The big thing about this contract for me is kind of the valuation of it, right? Because when you look at a team the Toronto Maple Leafs, for example, they have $40-some million tied up in 4 players, and all of them are literally in their prime right now, and are some of them about to become free agents and just either walk out the door or get paid even more.
Mm-hmm.
Is Lucas Raymond and Mitch Marner, for example? No, but he is not $3 million less than Mitch Marner should be.
No, Raymond could have gotten paid way more, I think. Toronto would have definitely paid him more because they just love paying people too much. But I think it's a great deal, and we're going to see how great of a deal it is in a couple of years when the going rate for players is going to be even higher.
I think the best thing that I like about this contract is that this contract is basically it's insured basically to the point where, like, if Lucas Raymond doesn't ever take a step forward, I don't think he will. I think he will continue to accelerate both his growth and this team. But let's say Lucas Raymond never takes another step forward and he just locks in at like the 70-ish points a year. This is still a very fair contract for that player. And in 6 years, when the salary cap is up, this is going to look like a steal of a contract, even for a guy who only puts up 70 points a year. And, like, again, that's assuming worst case scenario, he never takes another step forward. Which
I'm feeling pretty good he will. I think a full year under Patrick Kane's tutelage is going to help him grow even more.
And the other thing is also he's going to get better players to play with. Like, I'm not going to snob on David Perron or like anybody like that, but let's just be honest here. You know, like, he's going to slowly have better defensemen to help feed the puck up the ice and help put them into like the more dangerous spots that you would expect like a player to score from. He's going to get higher end centers to eventually play with. I mean, Dylan Larkin obviously is the fixture number one center for Detroit. Eventually, though, I think Nate Danielson or Marco Casper will come through, which I think will eventually be an upgrade over JT Compher. JT Compher will more correctly slot into that the 3C position for the Wings. Andrew Kopp will be a 4C at that point. But either way, Lucas Raymond is going to eventually get higher caliber players to play with and also take personal steps forward, I think, for himself. Mm-hmm. This contract has the potential to be an absolute steal, even if he does not himself progress forward.
Yep, exactly. I mean, great deal. Berggren's deal, great too, and I think it's a 1 year, like, let's see what you can do. I think he's going to be a full-time wing this year, and it's a minimum deal, and I think he could get I think if he does impress this year, which I hope he does because I like Jonathan Berggren a lot, I think he gets a mid-level contract, like a 4 year, like $5 million, $4 million deal. Because he's not going to be a Lucas Raymond caliber player, I think. But I think he should be, if all pans out, a dependable, like, third, fourth line winger who can, get goals as well.
And that's the thing is, like, Berggren, he can be fine being a third line winger, and that's a fine draft pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I just love, like we talked about on the show last week, all this news is going to hit after we record, like it always does. So you're welcome, Wings fans.
What did Lucas Raymond hit literally the very next day?
They both did. Berggren came first, and then Raymond was like a couple hours later. There's a teacher in my building who's literally on the floor under me. I came downstairs, and I was like, hey, razor sign. He's like, I saw.
Jonathan Berggren, I think he's a very fair contract. Again, he's a guy who Detroit's kind of making him play prove it this year, right? He's making about $800,000-ish a year. This is a 1 year contract. I think for him, this is kind of Detroit throwing the chips at him and saying, hey, if you want to make a spot in this team for yourself, this is your year to do it, because that lineup is about to get a lot more crowded, whether fans realize that or not.
Yep.
We talked about this with Tim last week, but Detroit's kind of done accumulating prospects for the most part. They are in we are finishing development and we're getting ready to compete phase of their rebuild. The prospects who are coming through right now are kind of going to be the ones who are here while we're competing for cups in 2 or 3 years.
Yep. Yeah,
and I think this kind of puts a fire under Berggren of like, hey, show us if you can be here or not, because if you can't, well, we have to figure something else out.
Yeah, if you can't, there's a bunch of guys in the Wings and the Griffins that would love to take that spot.
And that's the thing is that they kind of, I think it seems to be like the narrative that this year they're expecting Berggren to learn how to take defensive strides forward at the NHL level, because we know his offense is there. We saw it with the Grand Rapids Griffins where he was putting up point per game level numbers. We saw when he came up to the NHL, he's able to put up goals. Like, we know this guy can shoot. We know he can read offensive plays just fine, but it's that defensive part of the game that Jonathan Berggren has to work on, that he has to improve at, because if he can't, that's when Detroit has to have those conversations of, hey, what are we doing with this guy? Because if he can't be a part of our lineup long term, you could flip him and get real assets. Now, you're probably not getting a first-round draft pick for him, but I don't think it would be unreasonable to trade him for a second and a third-round draft pick if he's not panning out.
Yep, for sure. I mean, I'm looking at the red and white rosters, and I'm seeing names on here who I'm like, they'd love that spot. They'd love to take that spot from him too. So it's a prove it deal. Prove you can be here. And I want him to be. I like him.
But just kind of like the way that like we moved like the forward, Scott signed again this past week, that's kind of an indicator for the wings of what the projection is for this team moving forward. It's the Red Wings obviously see Lucas Raymond as a core piece of their forward group for the next foreseeable decade.
Yep.
Jonathan Berggren, I think it kind of sends them a message of, hey, if you want to be here, show us you want to be here.
Mm-hmm. Raymond showed it last year.
Yeah,
he needs to show it.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Raymond proved it last year. He wants to be here. Berggren needs to prove it, that he's willing to do what it takes to be here.
Yep, exactly.
We'll touch on to the other contract that the Red Wings signed this week in just a second. But first, we're going to talk about one of our sponsors for tonight's show, and that's BetterHelp. Again, the show is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you haven't already heard about it, BetterHelp is a basically online therapy, if you will. So, like, for example, like, you can talk to a therapist and kind of deal with things in your life. I mean, I can just kind of speak for myself here, but one thing I noticed is, like, when I was growing, like, as I've gotten older, I've stopped doing things that I like to do when I was younger. Like, I used to like learning things. I actually learned how to speak French, for example, when I was younger. I'm not super fluent, but I learned how to do it because it was something I'm interested in. I learned how to play guitar a little bit when I was younger, and I've kind of started to rekindle that. I've actually, like, I was taking lessons for a couple months. Like, I think it's an adult, that's kind of something, like, you kind of lose that curiosity and, like, that sense of, like, wanting to learn and experience new things. I know people who've gone to therapy, and they've really benefited from it a ton. Obviously, BetterHelp is worth a check out if you are considering therapy. You can rediscover a little bit of that curiosity that I was talking about with BetterHelp. You can visit betterhelp.com/THPN today. You can get 10% off actually for your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/THPN. David,
I mean, just to chime in on that ad read to people that were listening, getting therapy is not a weakness. Asking for help is not a weakness. Mental health is a serious thing. As someone who's experienced, therapy in my past, it's a very helpful thing to help you grow. Especially, like, it doesn't have to be like depression and things like that. It can be things like Jordan just brought up, like, things that you used to enjoy that you love learning and doing this. They can help you kind of figure out why and rekindle that. So seriously, people, if you need help, don't forget, just ask. But
okay.
Yeah.
Talking about rekindling things, David, my love for Moritz Seider has been rekindled because he signed a contract this week, 7 years at $8.5 million, a touch under Dylan Larkin's number.
What
a steal! What a steal!
My love was never gone for this man. They don't call it Motown for a reason.
All right, so again, 7 years, $8.5 million. I know people are going to look at Moritz Seider's stats and say, well, he hasn't had more than, a 60-point season, and he's not on the first power play unit. And when you look at some of the advanced analytics, they're not pretty. All of those are technically fair criticisms. I want to put a little asterisk by this, though. Let's look at a couple other factors that determine those things. One, Moritz Seider last year got the most difficult defensive deployments of any defenseman in the NHL. Not the Detroit Red Wings, not in his division, the entire NHL, and it was not close. This man got next to 0 offensive zone starts. He played the PK constantly. He was constantly starting in the defensive or neutral zone, which means he did not have the chance to generate offense from easy zone face-off draws where the other defenseman would send it his way and he could do a quick slap on the net. He didn't get the ability to play catch-up through a transition zone like a lot of other defensemen do. I understand why people are hesitant for this contract, but you shouldn't be if you are a Wings fan.
No.
This kid plays 23 minutes a night, almost 24 some nights. He plays the special teams that you need a high-end defenseman to play. He straight up carried Ben Sherratt with him.
Yes. He is not – that's what people are not understanding. He is not a Cale Makar offensive defenseman. Cale Makar reminds me of Nick Lidstrom in that, yes, he's good defensively, but that guy can find his way to the net. Seider can get to the net, but that's not what he's good at. He's good at shutting people down as a defenseman, and you put him in the spots where he can shut people down. I thought it was going to be $9 million when I saw that it was 8.5, right?
8.55, I think.
I was like, oh my God. I was mad that it wasn't 8 years. I was like, well, why can't it be 8 years? Why does it have to be 7? But we just locked up 2 of our best players for the foreseeable future, and I couldn't be happier. I mean, we'll talk about the news with like Edvinsson and stuff later in the show, but when Edvinsson gets into his swing of things, you'll have Edvinsson and Seider either on the same line or on their own lines. I don't know, but we're going to have a good top 4 defenseman defending for a while with those 2.
I mean, it's crazy to think about this, but in 3 years, the Detroit Red Wings top 4 D crew could be Moritz Seider, Simon Edvinsson, Axel Sandin Pellikka, and whoever they want from free agent. That is disgusting.
I mean, we almost had Jacob Trouba this summer from all the rumors that Nick was spreading, so who knows?
But you know how good Detroit's going to be when that's their top 4?
Yeah, I mean, those were the days. Like, yes, we had great goalies in Osgood and Hasek back in the day, but look who we had in front of them with Lidstrom, Rafalski, Chelios when he was still, able to move, Cronwall. Like, that's what we've been missing. Like, we can crap on the goaltending all we want, but when we didn't have good defensemen in front of them, of course our goaltenders were going to struggle. So, like, in a couple of years when we've got those guys, really grown up, ready to go, it's going to be a sight.
I think my big thing for this contract is, again, this is going to be like the Cale Makar contract, where like when you look at this one 4 years from now, and you're looking at all the other defensemen who are making like $10 or $11 million a year, like when you compare this to the Erik Karlsson contract, for example, and it's not to crap on Erik Karlsson, the guy's a great offensive defenseman, but this contract is so stupid good value in 3 years. Like, top pair guys are going to be making $10 million in 3 years after the cap goes up. I firmly believe that.
For sure.
And you're about to have Moritz Seider in his prime for 8.55.
And you have Yzerman over here pulling the Brad Holmes, just signing them right at the right time, cheaper than they would be.
This is probably, again, I said this last week, but I think Moritz Seider is the best defenseman to play for the Red Wings since Nick Lidstrom. And the fact that you just inked him for 7 years, that's big, especially to a very fair contract, one that in 2 or 3 years is going to look like it's a steal. I know I loved Cronwall to death, but Moritz Seider can defend in a way that he just didn't.
Who hits better, Cronwall or Seider?
Oh, I wouldn't want to get hit by either one, to be honest.
I don't think I've ever seen Cromwell do a reverse hit, where I've seen Seider do those reverse hits where someone tries to hit him and they just get wrecked. So, I don't know. It's tough. But, yeah, I would not want to take a hit from either of those men.
I wish that Tim and Nick were here. I want to get their opinions on it, but
I think we'll get them back for the next show. But they probably are a little happy they aren't here because, you brought up Patrick Kane earlier because we've got Patrick Kane now for the whole season. And sorry, let me rewind. We've got Detroit Red Wings legend Patrick Kane here, and he had some great media stuff. You said recently, Jordan.
We are going to talk about that in just a second. I'm not meaning to tease anybody watching the show, all right? But we will talk about that in just a second after we talk about our other sponsor for tonight's show, and that's DraftKings Sportsbook. If you haven't heard of DraftKings, it's a place you can bet on all the major sports like the NHL, the NFL, the NBA, stuff like that. So, like, obviously football is in full swing right now. You can bet on all of the games that are going on. If you're a Titans fan like me, you can bet on the fact that Will Levis is going to throw another touchdown and it's going to lead to a scoring point. But that's neither here nor there. If you're a fan of the Lions, you could bet that they're actually going to win games and look decent because Detroit decided that after 20 years of like misery for their fans, they're finally going to be like really good.
Yeah.
And they seem to have like really found out like how to play football and meaningful football in today's NFL. But anyway, whatever the sport is that you watch, you can bet on it on DraftKings. You can score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, which is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. Again, that's code THPN for new customers to get $250 and bonus bets when you bet just $5 and get 1 month of NFL Plus premium. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-798-9777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resorts in Kansas. You have to be 21 plus, age vary by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.com/ftball. NFL Plus premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus premium terms at nfl.com/terms. So, to be done with this teaser, let's talk about the Patrick Kane comments because I wish Tim and Nick were here so we could just kind of sulk on it.
Hear them. I want to see their faces as you read this. So we'll have to. And you know what? It's just such great news. We'll reread it next week, too, when they're here, just to make sure they really get it.
So, Patrick Kane, like, obviously all the players had their media discussions with the media for the Red Wings training camp. Tarasenko, you're excited about. Guys like DeBrincat having a full season on the Wings, under the Wings like system, you're excited about. One player's comments in particular really caught my interest, and that is the American legend Patrick Kane, 3-time Stanley Cup winner, arguably the best American forward of all time. I won't say best American player of all time because Chelios is the best American defenseman of all time in my books, and it's comparing apples to oranges because they're completely different positions. But anyway, back to the discussion at hand. Patrick Kane talked to the media for Detroit at the Red Wings training camp, and I'm going to read his quotes verbatim. The last couple of years, you still feel in some respects like you're a Blackhawk, right? Explained Kane the current state of like what's going on. Even when you go to New York or last year when I was in Detroit, there was still that sense that you're somewhat of a Blackhawk. And for me now, the page is officially turned. It's officially turned. So it's nice to be here in Detroit and build on what I was able to do last year and what the team was able to do and be a Red Wing, and I definitely feel like one now. I don't want to read into this too much, but David, is Patrick Kane about to be like the next Chris Chelios for the Red Wings and the Blackhawks, where like after he has his time in Chicago, he comes to Detroit, revitalizes his career, and becomes loved forever here?
Yes, he wins multiple Stanley Cups doing it. Hopefully. No, like it's great to hear him say that because like we both wanted him to re-sign this year, and I think he re-signed not for money really. Yes, we paid him pretty well this time, but I think really he sees something with this team. He can see where it's going. And that's something he wants to really be a part of. I think he sees guys like Larkin, Raymond, DeBrincat, Seider, guys he can mentor as well, because he is like the veteran presence on this team, which is funny to think about. But no, like those comments are great. I wish Nick and Tim were here I just want their reactions to that. So we'll reread it for them. But no, like he is the 2000s, the 2020s Chris Chelios for the Detroit Red Wings.
And I want to clarify, like, I'm not doing this to throw jabs at, like, Tim and Nick or any Hawks fan. I promise. I'm doing it because I'm so hyped that this guy's excited to be here with the Wings.
Like, exactly. Like, we were like, wow, like, we signed Patrick Kane last year. Hopefully the hip surgery does well because, like, we've seen it not with Backstrom. You know, it sucks to see Backstrom basically retiring because he can't really play anymore. But Patrick Kane looked like Patrick Kane last year.
And he's had a full season like off to actually train like he used to.
Yep. So he's been training. He's at like training camp with the team. He's working with the team. Like, geez Louise, our top six. I don't even know who's going to be on the top six, and I'm freaking excited. Like, I know the players. I just don't know who's going to be where.
And then, like, did you also catch his comments about Nate Danielson?
I did not.
He was talking about Nate Danielson. He's like, hey, he kind of reminds me a lot of Connor Bedard in that way, where like he's like really great, like a stick handler, and just like a really dynamic, basically like an awesome dynamic player. Like,
if Nate Danielson turns out to be this like
the superstar center
superstar center we've been hoping for, I'm going to lose my mind because I remember I think we were just really joking like, oh, Connor Bedard said Nate Daniels is the hardest guy he's had to play against, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, totally cool. We got him with the 15th pick. Well, hopefully he pans out. And like to hear people talking about him, like star players being like, yeah, he's good. Like seeing these things, I'm like, oh God, please.
This is probably the most happy Red Wings show we've had since we've done this podcast, David.
I'm willing to bet it is. I just remember the dark days of when we first started this show. Oh, God. The pain. It was just so much pain in our voices every time we talked. And, like, Nick was happy because he's like, the Blackhawks were still doing pretty good.
They were decent enough to watch.
They were decent. They were a playoff team. It's like, yeah, they're good. And it's like, oh, I remember the playoffs. Those are good times. And now I just feel like it's not if we make the playoffs, it's when. And I'm thinking this season we finally break that open.
And so that's kind of one other thing I want to talk about is, so last season I think there was hope that the Red Wings would make the playoffs. I don't think it's outlandish to say that this season there are expectations that they will. And I think it's, in some ways, I think it's unfair, right? Because you've got a player like Simon Edvinsson who's going to step into this roster, and he's going to be expected to perform at the caliber you expect on a playoff team. You're going to have probably one of either Carter Mazur or Marco Casper step onto this team and probably be expected to play somewhat like a playoff caliber team player would play.
Yeah.
Jonathan Berggren is going to be making the transition to the NHL full-time, at least I'd expect this year. And then you've also got potentially Albert Johansson, again, might be making the transition to the NHL full-time this year. And it's hard to say that the Wings aren't a playoff team because they have rookies, but I don't think it's outlandish to say that they should make the playoffs this year if those new guys stepping in can just look like everyday NHLers.
Exactly. I agree. Definitely, like, you're going to have these young guys who are going to be like, hey, this is the expectation now. Guys that haven't really worn the winged wheel for a very long time, like Edvinsson, Casper, Mazur. So this is the expectation. This is the Detroit Red Wings. This is a team that's going to be expected to fight for a playoff spot. If our goaltending stays healthy, and it sounds like, Ville Husso is feeling 110%, as he put it. Let's see. I mean, what the heck is our tandem going to be coming out of camp? Who's going to be our 1 and 2?
That's it. Thing. I mean, because the Wings kind of have 3 viable options for goaltender. They have Talbot, they have Husso, and Alex Lyon. He kind of proved himself the starter last year when Ville Husso went down.
Yep, and then he kind of got hurt and was a little shaky after that. So hopefully this is the year we take a step with goaltending and we have dependable goaltending. I think we're going to have better defense in front of them. I hope we do. But it's just crazy to think about. I think Kosa is going to be the number one in Grand Rapids this year.
Yeah, he should be.
Either Jack Campbell or whoever isn't making the roster will be sitting behind him, helping him grow and develop too.
I don't know. I think honestly though, this is like the most excited I have been for a season since 2016.
I mean, Jordan, this is what the show is tonight. It's the Oops All Red Wings. You got that nice bowl of Red Wings with that ice cold milk splashing it. Oh, what a great season to be excited for.
I don't have anything else to talk about for the Wings. I guess the last thing I do want to talk about is, so we obviously, like, we've seen training camp, and like the red and white game was today, and you can watch
a preseason game right now with the Islanders and Devils.
Yeah, so the preseason started today. The Red Wings, their preseason doesn't start until tomorrow, I believe. It's either tomorrow or Tuesday is when the Red Wings preseason starts. Mm-hmm. But we kind of talked about this like last week in terms of like players are most looking forward to for the preseason. Obviously, I think Marco Kasper was mine. What do you think would surprise you the most to make the Red Wings roster out of preseason? Like, which player just realistically do you think is the most likely to do it? Because
for like the opening night roster?
Yeah, because I want to say Marco Kasper, but it sounds like coaching staff really likes what they've seen out of Carter Mazur.
Oh, man. I think if I had to choose between the two of them, because they're the two most likely choices, I think it's Mazur. I mean, it'd be crazy to see both of them make opening roster, but if I was to pick one of the two, I think it'd be Mazur over Kasper.
We can talk about the rest of the NHL for a second, I guess, and I guess it's kind of the rest of the NHL. But so the preseason officially started today.
We play Wednesday.
Yeah, I know we played. Yeah, I know we had a couple games coming up, but they weren't going to be until later on in the week. I mean, I guess for the first time in a while, we can do like the flash forward segment of the show.
It's back.
But so the Red Wings are going to technically have 3 games this week before we get back for next week's show. They play the Blackhawks on Wednesday down in Chicago. They play on Friday back in Detroit, and then they play the Penguins on Saturday. Would I be crazy to think that the Red Wings could take all 3 of these?
I mean, they could. Preseason's unexpected because you're going to be playing a lot of your guys that may not make the roster, guys that are fighting for a roster spot. So I don't look too deep into it, but I could see us sweeping the Hawks and possibly beating the Penguins.
So the Penguins, they looked rough against the Sabres.
Yeah.
The Hawks, I feel like the thing with the Hawks is it's really going to depend on who Detroit puts out there.
Yep.
And then it's also going to be determined by can guys like Frank Nazar and Philip Kurashev and Connor Bedard step up and kind of take over games. Like, I feel like that's kind of what their the Hawks preseason will be about. Can those guys at the forward take over games and kind of establish they're setting the tempo, they set the rhythm, and they lead by example?
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait. I think we're going to see a lot of Amadeus Lombardi in the preseason because to see where he fits. I think he's going to stay on the Griffins, but it'll be nice to see him kind of lining up. He's a player I just like, really his name, but also he's got a scoring touch for the Firebirds last year, and I want to see if that transitions well over to Grand Rapids.
Yeah. The other piece of news that I wish Tim and Nick were here to talk about, but unfortunately they're not. And don't worry, we're not going to steal their thunder. They're going to let them have theirs next week. But just like a little spoiler, obviously, it came out this week that the Chicago Blackhawks named Nick Foligno as their next captain. Just my initial thoughts. I think this is a fantastic decision by the Blackhawks organization. Nick Foligno was one of those guys who, even though he may not be playing your first or second line, he leads by example. He knows what hard work and competition looks like. And he's one of those guys who absolutely tries to facilitate it, and he puts in the work every single day when he's playing and practicing. I think if there's anybody who the Hawks are going to pick, this was the pick. And I know people wanted Connor Bedard. I didn't like that pick. I think Foligno is the correct pick.
Yeah.
And good for the Hawks org for picking somebody, not because of popularity, but because it's what the actual team needs.
Exactly. He's a good, strong veteran leadership presence. That's a captain. I don't like when teams make a kid their captain because I don't think they're ever ready for that responsibility right off the bat. I mean, Connor Bedard's going to be the captain at one point. It's a matter of time, but I think he's still new. He just had his first season as an NHL player. You don't, in my opinion, you shouldn't get a C that early.
No, you just don't have the credentials yet.
No, like as a kid, when I played, NHL, and as an adult when I played NHL and I played for the Red Wings, I don't give myself the C. I'm just there. And if the team wants to give me the C later on, I'm like, cool. I don't want it. But like, I wasn't the kind of person to be like, oh, I just made this 18-year-old rookie on the Red Wings. Give him the C. That's foolish. And I don't think that's real. Like, he needs to earn that. That is like a badge of honor for a team to represent them as their captain. It's something that he will get. I'm 1,000% sure of. Just not something he needs to have yet.
Yeah, like it, especially for an Original Six club, that is like a real badge of honor to wear the captaincy for an Original Six club. And I'm glad that the Blackhawks didn't rush this decision and just throw it on Connor Bedard to sell tickets. They took their time and said, we want this kid to be basically able to develop and not have all the spotlight on him. Let's give it to this other player who has managed spotlight before and let him kind of help this kid become that leadership figure that you want him to be.
Exactly.
But no, we're going to absolutely talk about this with Tim and Nick next week on the show. So for any Hawks fans who are tuning in, we're not going to skip over this. We will talk about it for sure. Just it happened really quick, and we did want to touch on it because it is kind of relevant to the show and what we talk about here. But I don't think I have anything else on the docket for tonight's show.
Nope. Just, can't wait for some Red Wings hockey to start back up. And I've missed hearing Ken Daniels, Mickey Redmond, and all of them. So I can't wait to hear their voices again this season.
I can't either. But I guess in the meantime, that's going to be it for our show. As always, thank you to everybody who tunes into the show and catches the show, whether you watch it or listen to it. We really appreciate you guys checking us out and giving us your ears, your eyeballs. It really helps our show grow when you leave us feedback or whatever the social media currency is of choice on the platform you find us. We are all over the internet. Feel free to give us a like, follow, share, whatever it is that you can give us. It really does help the show grow. And give us some feedback as well if you have any for that. It helps us make the show better for you guys as well. But again, for your host tonight, Jordan Linscott, for my co-host, David Barnhouse, this has been another edition of the Stick Blade Podcast. We will catch you guys back all here next time. And in the meantime, stay safe, take care of each other, take care of yourselves. Catch you back here next week. Take it easy.